Welcome back to This Week in Immigration. I'm Jordan LaPier. This week is a new family separation policy on the way, a conservative immigration bill in the House, and the NAFTA gang gets back together after all. But first, remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're at it, leave a review to help more people find this program. You can also stream This Week in Immigration on our website at bipartisanpolicy.org. And as always, check out bipartisanpolicy.org/immigration for more information on the stories we discuss here on the show. And here with me today are Theresa Cardinal Brown, Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy. Hi, Theresa.
Hi, Jordan.
Laura Hall, Senior Manager at BBC Action. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
And Cris Ramón, Policy Analyst. Hi, Cris. The Washington Post and Politico reported earlier this month that the Trump administration is considering new options for detaining and separating families at the border to deter the continued spike in families arriving from Central America. Cris, I'll put the first question to you today. The administration's initial efforts on this front sparked widespread backlash earlier this year. So why is the administration considering taking another run at this, and how serious are they about doing it?
So basically, they've been extremely frustrated with the fact that the numbers of individuals, primarily families, seeking asylum in the United States has been increasing over the summer. And what in their view, they're saying that because the original family separation policy was ended, that's why people are coming in. And so for them, that's the idea, that we're going to try to deter these individuals. But it is worth noting that the reports from the Post, as well as from Politico, suggest that the support for new family separation policies isn't universally accepted, or at least there are hesitations about it, primarily on the logistics, for instance. So, parts of the administration are worried, do we have enough detention space? Can we detain all these families? Do we have the capacity to implement these policies? So you do have some hesitations in the White House, whereas, you do also have immigration hardliners who have been pushing this, saying this is the only way we can deter these individuals from coming to the United States.
So what exactly are the proposals that are under consideration? What is the administration looking at doing?
So what the reports are saying is that there's an option that they're going to call, quote unquote, the binary choice. And basically what you have is that if a family is detained together, under current immigration policies, they cannot, families cannot be detained for more than 20 days because children can't be put in detention for more than 20 days. Once that 20-day period ends, then the parents have a choice. They can stay in family detention with a child for months or years, as the case that they're on for immigration proceeds through the immigration court system, or allow the children to be taken to a government shelter so other relatives or guardians can come and pick them up. And so that's the idea that's being proposed right now.
And how does that differ from what was done earlier this year? And how does it maybe address some of the criticisms of that?
Well, the thing is, what was done earlier this year is that, the families would be detained at the U.S.-Mexico border. And what would happen there is that there was no option given to parents as to whether they could stay with their children or not. Parents were being prosecuted for violating, immigration laws, and then they would be put largely through the criminal justice system, as that is, that part of the charges held against them. They're being put through that court system, and then eventually going to be coming back into the immigration court system to process the removals. All the while, their children are being held under Health and Human Services in their custody as their cases are proceeding forward. So the key idea here is that the parents are given a certain level of discretion in decisions to what happens with their children. And at least what the administration is arguing is that there's been a series of litigations against this policy, that the judge overseeing that litigation said this is a reasonable choice. So that's their argument, saying this is a little bit different. This is what the judge said we could do. We're giving the parents discretion. And I think that's a key difference between the two policies.
So in the last two episodes, we've discussed, and you just mentioned earlier, the implementation problems around the first version of this policy. Questions about whether it was effective in deterring families fleeing violence in Central America. So is your sense that a new version of this policy will encounter these same issues? And what is the administration doing now to try to lay the groundwork if they're going to implement a new policy?
The reports have been very straightforward. They've been reporting exactly what we've been writing about over the summer, that basically there isn't enough capacity to deal with this increase in the number of individuals and families primarily coming to the United States. Actually, a couple of hours ago, the Post just reported the latest numbers of family unit apprehensions at the U.S.-Mexico border, and they were saying it was basically approximately 16,700 family unit apprehensions happened in September. It's the highest number on record. So when you have that many number of individuals coming through, how are you going to be able to detain them and hold them? I mean, that's the key thing. And then what we've been seeing as well is that in some instances they have to be released into the communities. And it's kind of ironic because the administration introduced these policies or wants to introduce similar versions of it because they were trying to fight, quote unquote, catch and release, where, families would be detained, they would be, processed through the immigration court system, but as they're waiting for their trial, or at least before their hearing, they would be released into the communities. Right now, if we have this surge of individuals coming into the border and we don't have enough detention capacity, we're going to have to revert back to this practice that the administration wanted to fight. And in that sense, it almost becomes ironic because they're saying, well, this is the reason people are coming here. And basically, the whole condition of their capacity to be able to hold families shows that won't be able to happen.
I would just add, if I can, Jordan, that
Yeah.
the administration is focusing an awful lot on detention as deterrence. This has been their strategy from day one, and it's not unique to this administration. Previous administrations have believed in that as well. Part of the problem, though, is that we have seen no evidence that detention or family separation has really deterred significantly the flow of migrants coming up from Central America. The other thing that was in the news today is that supposedly there's a new migrant caravan making its way from Honduras. And President Trump tweeted out very defiantly this morning that he is going to take away all foreign aid from Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador if they don't stop these migrants from coming through their countries. That's a pretty significant threat. And the question is, if you take away the aid from these countries that's meant to help conditions in those countries so that migrants don't want to leave, how is that actually going to deter migrants from coming? And the detention also has not proven effective at reducing the number of migrants coming. They're coming because they believe they're safer trying to get to the United States than staying where they are. That's a very high bar to overcome. And they're focusing everything on detention, whether it's family detention or adult detention, rather than looking at the flow of immigration into the asylum system. The asylum system is what's causing all of these backlogs. It's the immigration courts. It's the adjudicators for asylum. So now they're also trying to look at other methods of reducing the ability to get asylum or even claim credible fear. That's sort of the next level. So eventually all this is going to run up against and has run up against some court cases. So advocates have been suing the administration over these detention policies. I think we can expect some lawsuits if they crack down on asylum too much, because we do have requirements under our law and international law to allow people to make a claim for asylum. That is part of our law. And so asking for asylum in and of itself is not illegal. So I think all of these things are just a matter of the administration not looking really comprehensively about this new flow of migration, trying harsher and harsher methods to deter it that are going to have an additional backlash, I think.
I think to end on this note is that one of the reasons you were able to see apprehensions drop between 2001 and 2011 was that the migrant flows, and we've been talking about this for a while, were primarily single Mexican men looking for work in the United States. And yes, there was deterrent policies based around detention and prosecutions, but at the same time, the other thing that was happening was the Mexican economy was growing, the U.S. economy was going through the recession, and the demographics, the population of young single Mexican men who would move to the United States, that population shrunk. Those three things combined together in order to make it basically more likely that you're able to deter more individuals when their thinking is A, why am I going to bother going to the United States when the Mexican economy is stronger? Why am I going to go to the United States if there are no jobs there? And their fear of my peers who are going to move. All those three things came together and made it such that the deterrent policies that were being basically enacted under the Bush and the Obama administrations would be more effective. But that's not happening here. Here we're talking about completely different conditions. It's not like violence will naturally go away. I mean, it's going to require a lot more intervention from the United States as well as these governments. These people are fleeing horrible conditions. And so the thing is, at the end of the day, if you're just going to say, we're going to deter them through these policies, you also have to look at the different confluence of factors that will make it more likely or less likely that that policy will be successful.
All right. After the break, immigration in the House. Last week, House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, a Republican, introduced what he calls a conservative immigration bill in the House. This bill would fund the president's wall and include some provisions to target sanctuary cities and undocumented immigrants. Laura, I'll turn to you here. What prompted McCarthy to act now? The House is technically in recess, and with little time left before the end of the Congress, it seems unlikely this bill could get through both houses.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is true. I think everyone's focused on the midterm elections coming up in 3 weeks, and I'll say this is probably an election move by McCarthy, but not in the way you might be thinking of. So we've got the big midterm elections where folks like you and I will go to the polls to cast our ballot. We also have leadership elections within the House of Representatives and Congress, where the parties each elect their next leaders. With Paul Ryan moving on and retiring, there's a vacancy in the top spot in the Republican House. McCarthy's currently the number 2. I think he has designs on being the leader of the House Republican caucus. So I think this was a move, it's a kind of a campaign move in and of a way to shore up support amongst his
Within
own
his
caucus,
own caucus, sure.
Some of whom are pretty hardline on immigration. So I think him coming out with this hardline immigration conservative bill is both an outward and an inward signal that he's going to be tough on immigration. If you vote for me, for the leader of your party, I've got your back on this issue.
But then the complicating factor is we've heard previously that House Republicans are hesitant about taking another vote on immigration before the midterms. Has that dynamic changed at all?
I don't think that dynamic has changed. I don't think this bill will be voted on before the midterms or probably after the midterm elections. The timing issue that you mentioned, there's not a lot of legislative days in session. Even if they come back after the election for like a lame duck, they got a lot of things they have to get through. Sometimes just the dynamic after an election is completely different too. You've got, if the House does flip and Democrats take over, are they willing to play ball on this issue? Do they want to come to the table? I think as we saw in the immigration debate that happened in both the House and Senate earlier this year, a standalone bill on one issue, and McCarthy's does deal with some enforcement things, but basically it's a border bill. That's not going to move forward in this House of Representatives. That's less likely to move forward in a House of Representatives where Democrats know if they wait just a few short weeks, they're leading the agenda. And so I think just the timing of this is more kind of an internal thing within his own party than something he actually thinks is going to get across the finish line.
All right, so let's spend a second on the substance of this, though. So earlier this year, the conservative option on the table was the Goodlatte bill, the Securing America's Future Act. How is this McCarthy proposal different from that?
Well, I mean, I think there are some less things in this bill. This is primarily a border bill. I think McCarthy's bill has got $5 billion for border funding and the wall. Some other elements, kind of surveillance, drones, technology, things like that. It's a lot of President Trump's plan. And that's another dynamic I'll point out, too. McCarthy and Trump, by all accounts, are pretty close. They have a pretty good relationship. By McCarthy kind of essentially introducing a bill that's kind of Trump's wall in legislative form, I'm guessing that's something that endears him to the president a little bit more.
So aside from this bill, funding for the Department of Homeland Security is going to be a flashpoint in coming months. Yes. How will the debate over immigration enforcement impact those DHS funding negotiations?
I think it will. As I said earlier, you've kind of got to cobble together this package to get things across the line that enough members of the House and the Senate can vote for to get it together. I think the DHS bill is going to be a fight. It kind of passed through committee earlier this year. They punted it to the lame duck because I don't think House leadership wanted to take the vote right before the election. So I think this is going to be part of the broader debate that we've heard. The dynamic could certainly come into play that if the House flips, Democrats, do they come to the table on this kind of bill? Trump said several times that he's willing to shut down the government over getting a wall. I think congressional leaders, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, do not want to shut down. So that could be kind of an inter-party battle too between Trump and some of his peers, between the congressional branch and the executive branch. I think it's going to be a fight. So stay tuned on that front.
I just want to add very quickly that DHS funding also, the administration is going to ask for more funding for detention. We just talked about they're trying to ramp up detention as a deterrence method. They're already out of money for detention they have. They don't have any more money in the current appropriations to go get more detention. They're moving money from other parts of the department and other agencies to fund the detention they have. Democrats have flatly refused to pay for more detention. And so not only will there be a fight over the border wall money in the DHS budget, I expect a very strong fight over this detention funding as well.
Right. The family separation policy is something that I feel like a lot in Congress didn't get a chance to weigh in on. That move was a pretty unpopular decision amongst Democrats and swing voters, independents. And I think if lawmakers feel like this is their chance to kind of weigh in and vote against that and show that that's not what they believe in, they might take that chance.
All right. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Up ahead, NAFTA, or is it the USMCA? Over the last month, the United States, Mexico, and Canada have put the finishing touches on a new pact to replace the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. Canada came on board at the 11th hour, so now we have the shiny new U.S., Mexico, Canada Agreement, or USMCA. Theresa, this new agreement has a lot of moving parts. Do any of them deal with immigration among the three countries?
Well, the original NAFTA did. The original NAFTA did have several immigration categories, including some details about what kind of business activities people can do in each country related to travel. It allowed for pre-clearance, but one of the most well-known categories is something called the TN, or Trade NAFTA Visa. This is a work visa that allowed nationals from any of the three countries to work in one of the other three countries if they were a professional in certain enumerated occupations and had a job offer in the other country. There were several advantages to the TN visa. It could be adjudicated very quickly, including right at the border, at least for Canadians. It didn't usually have a labor market test. There's no ultimate length of time. It's renewable indefinitely over the years. And so it was a very popular professional visa for Canadians and Mexicans working in the United States and for Americans to work in the other countries. So there was a lot of concern that in this renegotiation, somehow that category would be upended. In fact, it wasn't touched. Somewhere along the agreements, the parties agreed that they would not address immigration as part of this new USMCA deal. So those categories remain intact. They remain untouched. As far as we can tell, that is not going to change.
So looking ahead, Cris, how could the USMCA impact migrant flows among the three countries? And has NAFTA's implementation given us any suggestions about those future flows?
So the TN visa, if you look at the overall numbers, was pretty popular among Canadians. A large number of Canadians will be able to use that as a way to come to the United States. One way to think about the TN visa is also sort of an analog a little bit to the H-1B visa, the high school visa that we have in the United States. So they were able to use it, and obviously it was a little bit easier for them to apply for it, and also it's easier for them to reapply for it. So it wasn't an enormous stream of Canadians coming into the United States. Obviously, I think they were coming here through other legal migration streams to work in the United States, but it was pretty popular. It wasn't as popular with Mexican nationals. You didn't really see an upsurge or uptick there. But the question is, we're dealing now with a new agreement, and I think likely we'll continue just seeing the same trends. I think, if anything else, it really is going to come down to a question of, as the administration is sort of trying to clamp down a little bit on legal migration streams through the H-1B visa system, through a whole host of regulations that they're proposing, is the TN visa going to become a new way for at least individuals from Canada and Mexico to sort of be able to circumvent those changes and be able to go through them? As Theresa said, there's no labor market test. That's one way that's a little bit easier for them to be able to come to the United States.
Explain what that means, a labor market test.
So for the H-1B category, employers that want to utilize the category have to sign an attestation that they're paying wages and working conditions similar to U.S. workers, that there's no U.S. workers who will be displaced by the hiring of this individual. And in some cases, they have to show that that there's not an American that can do it. One of the reasons that Mexicans have not used the TNs as long as they're subject to some of those tests where Canadians are not, that was a discrepancy in the TN. Mexico also, for the first several years of NAFTA, had a cap. There's no longer a cap. But the TN is still valuable in part because there is no cap now for either Mexicans or Canadians under the TN. And every year there is a cap of 85,000 on the H-1B visas, which is used up almost immediately. So for companies that have the option to use the TN in lieu of the H-1B, there's more certainty they can get it. The other category I would mention that did uptick from both Canada and Mexico after NAFTA was the L1. L1 is an intra-company transferee. So if you are coming to work for a subsidiary, affiliate, a parent of your company abroad into the United States, you can transfer in basically with this L1 visa, and it allows you to live and work in the United States for a number of years. That has been very popular with particularly Mexican companies that have invested in the United States. A lot of executives and managers and even specialized knowledge workers from Canada and Mexican companies that have made investments in, or U.S. companies that have made investments in Canada and Mexico are using these L1 visas a lot more. And again, that was a pre-existing visa in the United States. Prior to NAFTA, one of the things NAFTA did was make it easier to apply for those if you were a NAFTA country. And again, I think that depending on how USMCA maybe rearranges some of the investments and where companies decide to put their various facilities, that may change the movement of those executives, managers between the countries.
So, Theresa, I want to ask you a semi-related question before we wrap up today. Canada last week took steps to legalize marijuana use, recreational marijuana use, but U.S. officials have been warning that Canadians who work or invest in the legal pot business there could face a lifetime ban on traveling to the United States. So what's the situation?
So there's been a little bit of a back and forth on this. So the thing to understand is this has been a long-standing, if you will, irritant between Canada and the United States. Under U.S. law, if you have ever been convicted of a crime involving a controlled substance, including possession, including marijuana, you can be inadmissible to the United States, barred from the United States. And this has been something that has caught a lot of Canadians off guard when they tried to come to the United States, because U.S. government officials have access to Canada's criminal history database. They have access to ours. So traditionally, this has been a bit of an irritant in that Canadians, when they come to the United States, would get caught for past cannabis violations. So one of the parts of this legalization in Canada is a pardon for anyone who had past violations. So there's a lot of question. Now we have a legal recreational business in Canada for cannabis, and U.S. officials tried to warn very sternly that we still have our prohibitions in the United States. So it's not just that if you have a conviction, but also if you are coming to the United States in furtherance of illegal trafficking in a controlled substance, which marijuana is in the United States, or you have been participant in that abroad, that could also render you inadmissible to the United States. So originally the U.S. officials said, look, just because it's legal in Canada, if you maybe even are investing in a cannabis business in Canada or you're an employee, that could bar you from coming to the United States. I think there was some conversations between Canadian and U.S. officials, and so CBP clarified that a little bit and saying, well, just because you're involved in that in Canada, that might not bar you in the United States if you're not coming to do cannabis business in the United States. So here's what I would say to our Canadian friends. First of all, possession, consumption is still absolutely illegal at the federal level in the United States, and that's what controls at the border. Not state laws, because we do have some states that have legalized it, but federal law. So if you want to come to the United States, don't have a joint in your car, don't have stubs in your ashtray, don't bring anything, any residual in, you will get stopped and you will be prevented from coming in. If you believe that now that it's legal in Canada, and we have some states in the United States that legalized marijuana in the United States, you can come in to conduct business with them, no, you cannot, because that is still an unlawful activity at the federal level in the United States. So the best thing is to be cautious about this. I think this will still evolve over the way, but yeah, we're not open for the cannabis business at the border right now. No, we are not.
Helpful travel tips.
Travel tips.
Theresa, Laura, Cris, thank you so much for joining me, and thanks to you all for listening. And as always, a special thanks to our producer, Emily Schrader. Please take a second to find us on Facebook by searching Bipartisan Policy Center, or on Twitter at BPC_bipartisan. And again, don't forget to subscribe and leave your feedback on this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Bipartisan Policy Center. Join us again next time on This Week in Immigration.